A homeless boy finds a lost phone belonging to a millionaire's daughter. He could have sold it for a fortune, but he made one call instead. That call cost one man his empire and saved his soul. What's the most unexpected phone call you've ever received? Let us know in the comments and get ready for a story you won't forget. The world of Alistair Vance was built of glass and steel, a kingdom of silence 48 floors above the ceaseless roar of the city. From his penthouse office, the people below were an abstraction, a current of insignificant lives flowing through the concrete canyons he had helped to shape. His empire, Vance Industries, was a titan of global logistics, a machine of perfect, ruthless efficiency. And he was its absolute monarch, the isolated emperor. His reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window was a ghost in a $1,000 suit, his features sharp, his eyes the color of a winter sky, empty and cold. It had been 10 years since the world had held any color for him. 10 years since the phone call that had informed him of the fiery crash on a coastal highway. 10 years since Sarah, the only warmth he had ever known, had been stolen from him, leaving behind nothing but a cavernous void that no acquisition or merger could ever fill. Now, his entire existence was funneled into a single point of focus, the Apex merger, a $50 billion deal that would be the capstone of his legacy, the final gleaming monument to a life devoid of love but full of victory. His fiancée, Isabella Thorne, sat opposite his desk, her beauty as precise and flawless as the cut of the diamond on her finger. She was the perfect partner for his world, ambitious, intelligent, and emotionally sterile. Theirs was a merger of dynasties, not of hearts. "The board is nervous about the final vote, Alistair," she said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "They need your reassurance." "They'll have it," he replied, his gaze fixed on the stock ticker, scrolling across one of his 6 monitors. "The numbers don't lie. This deal is ironclad." His phone buzzed on the glass desk, a private line reserved for his inner circle. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. An annoyance. He was about to swipe it away when a strange impulse made him pause. He answered, his tone clipped. "Vance." The voice on the other end was small, hesitant, and swallowed by the sound of street noise. Hello, is this Mr. Vance?" It was a child, a boy. Alistair's patience, a finite and precious resource, evaporated. "Who is this? How did you get this number?" I found it," the boy stammered. "It's in a phone, for ice, in case of emergency. There's a girl, sir. Her name is Lily. She fell, and she's breathing funny. I think she's really sick." Alistair's mind raced. A scam, a new elaborate phishing attempt. "I don't know any Lily. You have the wrong number." "No, I don't think so," the boy insisted, a note of desperate sincerity in his voice. "She told me your name. She said you went to the stars, but you might come back. She calls you her starman." The word hit Alistair like a physical blow. Starman. It was a foolish private name from another lifetime, a name only one person had ever called him. Sarah. They had been teenagers lying on a blanket under a meteor shower, planning a future that had burned to ashes on a California highway. His blood ran cold. The tickers, the merger, Isabella's perfectly sculpted face. It all dissolved into a meaningless haze. His knuckles were white where he gripped the phone. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper that was utterly alien to him. Isabella watched him, her brow furrowed with a perfectly calibrated expression of concern. "Alistair, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." He hadn't. He had heard one, and it was calling him back to a world he had buried a decade ago. The boy gave him an address, a clinic in a part of the city Alistair's limousine only ever passed over on an expressway, a place of peeling paint and forgotten people. "I have to go," Alistair said, standing so abruptly his chair screeched against the marble floor. "Go where?" "Alistair, the pre-merger briefing is in an hour," Isabella protested, rising with him. He was already moving toward the door, shrugging into his overcoat, as if it were armor. He didn't look back. The $50 billion deal, the culmination of his life's work, had suddenly become an abstraction. The only thing that felt real was the terrified voice of a boy on the phone and a name from the grave. A ghost named Lily. The foundation of his glass kingdom had just been shattered, and he was falling. The drive downtown was a descent into another reality. The gleaming skyscrapers of his world gave way to brick tenements tattooed with graffiti, their fire escapes clinging like rusted vines. The air itself seemed thicker here, heavy with the smells of exhaust and desperation. Isabella sat beside him in the back of the Maybach, her silence a finely sharpened weapon of disapproval. "This is a mistake, Alistair," she said, her voice low and controlled. "You're the CEO of a global corporation on the verge of the biggest deal in its history. You can't just go chasing some obvious shakedown." "It might not be," he said, his eyes fixed on the crumbling cityscape. The word Starman echoed in his head, a key turning in a lock he thought was rusted shut forever. A child calls with a sob story and a lucky guess at a nickname? It's a classic con. They'll have a sick-looking girl, a mountain of fake medical bills, and a story designed to pull at the heartstrings of a man they've researched. They know about Sarah. It's public record. He knew she was probably right. Every logical part of his brain, the part that had built an empire, screamed that this was a trap. But the cold, hollow space where his heart used to be felt a flicker, a phantom pain he hadn't experienced in years. He had to see. He had to know. The clinic was even worse than he'd imagined. A grimy storefront with a flickering fluorescent sign that read, "Community Care." The driver pulled to the curb looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Wait here," Alistair commanded, stepping out of the climate-controlled luxury into the raw city air. "I'm coming with you," Isabella said, her heels clicking on the broken pavement as she followed. "You need a witness when they make their demand." They sighed. The waiting room was cramped and smelled of antiseptic and poverty. A young boy with wide, intelligent eyes and clothes that were clean but worn thin stood up as they entered. He couldn't have been more than 9 or 10. "Mr. Vance?" he asked. It was the voice from the phone. "I'm Vance. Where is she?" The boy, Leo, led them past a row of plastic chairs to a small examination room. On the paper-covered table sat a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She had a small bandage on her forehead and was clutching a worn-out stuffed rabbit. Her hair was a cascade of dark curls, and her eyes, Alistair's breath caught in his throat. They were his eyes. The same shape, the same startling shade of gray, staring back at him from a face that was a perfect heartbreaking echo of Sarah's. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. This wasn't a con, this was an impossibility. "Lily, this is the man from the phone," Leo said softly. The little girl looked at him, her expression a mixture of fear and a strange, unreadable hope. Before Alistair could form a single word, a woman rushed into the room. "Lily, baby, I told you to wait for me. Who are these people?" she said, her voice frantic. Then she looked up, and her eyes met Alistair's. The world stopped spinning. It was Sarah. Older, her face etched with lines of hardship and worry he'd never seen, her hands calloused. But it was her, the ghost. The love he had mourned for a decade stood before him, alive and breathing and looking at him with utter shock and a rising tide of fury. "Alistair?" she whispered, the name a curse on her lips. Isabella stepped forward, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy that was laced with venom. "Alistair, darling, who is this? It seems we've stumbled into quite a performance." She looked from Sarah to Lily, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "The resemblance is well researched. I have to admit, it's a very convincing setup." Sarah's shock hardened into a protective wall of ice. She pulled Lily behind her, shielding her from his gaze. "Get out!" she hissed, her voice trembling with a decade of pain and betrayal. "Get away from my daughter." My daughter. The words hung in the sterile air. Alistair couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He was trapped between the ghost of his past and the impossible truth of his present. He had come here expecting a con artist. He had found a resurrection. He turned and walked out of the clinic, his mind a maelstrom of confusion and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. Back in the car, Isabella placed a cool hand on his arm. "I'll have our security team handle this," she said smoothly. "A restraining order, a private settlement to make them go away. It will be discreet." "No," Alistair said, his voice flat and hard. "Call Marcus. Tell him to drop everything. I want to know everything about Sarah Jenkins for the last 10 years. I want to know why I was told she was dead. I want to know who lied to me." He looked out the window, but he wasn't seeing the city. He was seeing a little girl with his eyes. The hunt for the truth had begun. The initial report from Marcus Thorne, his bulldog of a private investigator, landed on Alistair's desk 24 hours later. It was a slim file, but every page felt like a detonation. Marcus was thorough, discreet, and brutally efficient, the best in the business. And what he had found was not a simple con, but a labyrinth of tragic coincidences and cruel deceptions. The car crash was real. A multi-car pileup on the Pacific Coast Highway. A fire had consumed one of the vehicles, and the body inside, burned beyond recognition, had been identified as Sarah Jenkins through a wallet found nearby. A clerical error in a chaotic, understaffed morgue. The truth was that Sarah had been thrown from the car. She had been a Jane Doe, unidentified, in a coma at a county hospital for 3 months. Alistair read the lines again and again, the sterile words painting a picture of pure horror. While he was collapsing under the weight of a false grief, she was lying in a hospital bed, alone. The report continued. She had woken up with partial amnesia, disoriented and confused, and pregnant. By the time her memory fully returned months later, she had a newborn daughter and no way to reach him. "I tried to call," the file quoted a statement from a former nurse. "The family numbers were all disconnected. We sent a letter to the last known address. It was returned no longer at this address." He remembered it all. In his grief, he had sold the house they had planned to share. He'd changed his number. He'd cut himself off from every memory, every reminder. He had, in effect, erased himself from her world, just as she was trying to find her way back to it. The system and his own sorrow had conspired to keep them apart. He canceled his meetings, the Apex merger, the board. Isabella's insistent calls, they were all just noise. He drove himself, taking a simple black sedan instead of the Maybach, back to the part of town he had fled the day before. He found Sarah's apartment building, a rundown walk-up with peeling paint and a broken lock on the front door. He found her on the roof, hanging laundry on a line strung between 2 vents. The city skyline, his skyline, loomed in the distance like a promise she could see but never touch. "What do you want, Alistair?" she asked without turning around. Her voice was brittle. "The truth," he said, walking towards her. "I just read the report. The crash, the hospital. Sarah, I thought you were dead. I mourned you for 10 years. She finally turned, her eyes flashing with a decade of stored-up pain. "And I thought you abandoned me. I woke up from a nightmare to find out I was alone, pregnant, and that the man who said he loved me had simply vanished. I called your parents. They told me you'd moved on, that you wanted nothing to do with me. They said you thought the baby wasn't yours." Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. His parents. They had hated Sarah, seeing her as a distraction from the path they had laid out for him. He had believed their tearful confirmations of her death without question. He saw it now. The lie had not been a mistake. It had been an assassination of their love, a deliberate, cruel severing. "They lied," he said, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. "To both of us." "Lies don't change the last 10 years, Alistair," she said, her voice breaking. "They don't change the fact that I raised our daughter in poverty while you built an empire. I worked 2 jobs. I lived in shelters, all while you were up there in one of your glass towers, forgetting I ever existed." "I never forgot," he whispered, the admission raw and painful. There hasn't been a day. Her anger seemed to crumble, replaced by a profound weariness. She asks about you, you know. I told her you were a brave explorer, that you went to live among the stars. It was better than telling her I didn't know where you were, or that I thought you hadn't wanted us. The weight of it all pressed down on him. The lost years, the lies, the daughter he never knew. His world of spreadsheets and certainties was gone, replaced by a universe of regret. "Is she mine?" he asked, the question hanging between them, both a hope and a fear. Sarah's expression hardened again. "I won't have you questioning that. I won't have you hurting her. It's not for you or for me," he said, his voice firming with the old command he was used to. "It's for her. In my world, things have to be proven, undeniable. A DNA test, Sarah, for her sake. So there are no more questions, no more lies, just the truth once and for all." She stared at him for a long moment, a battle raging in her eyes. Finally, she gave a single, sharp nod. It was a concession not of trust, but of necessity. The test was arranged with the sterile efficiency Alistair commanded. A doctor came to the apartment, a simple cheek swab for him, and for Lily. The wait for the results was the longest 48 hours of his life. When the email arrived, he opened the encrypted file with a trembling hand. He scrolled past the medical jargon to the final conclusion. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. The numbers on the screen blurred. It was real. She was real. Lily was his daughter. The point of no return had been crossed. He was no longer just Alistair Vance, the CEO. He was a father. And a decade of carefully constructed walls around his heart came crashing down. The first attempts at fatherhood were a disaster. Alistair, a man who could command boardrooms and orchestrate billion-dollar transactions, was utterly inept in the face of a 7-year-old girl. His instincts, honed in the corporate world, were all wrong. He sent a truck from the city's most expensive toy store to Sarah's tiny apartment. Dolls taller than Lily, a miniature electric car, enough Legos to build a small house. Sarah called him, furious. "Take it back, all of it." "I don't understand," he said, genuinely baffled. "It's the best." "She doesn't need the best, Alistair. She needs you." Sarah's voice was tight with frustration. "She needs a father, not a bank. Stop trying to buy her. You can't put a price on the last 7 years." He was adrift. Stripped of his checkbook, what did he have to offer? He arranged to meet them at a public park near their apartment, a neutral ground where his power and wealth were irrelevant. It was a crisp autumn day. He arrived in a cashmere sweater and tailored trousers, feeling as out of place as a wolf in a petting zoo. Lily was shy, hiding behind Sarah's legs. He knelt down, trying to remember how to speak to a child. "Hello, Lily. I brought you something." He held out a small, intricately carved wooden bird. It was a trinket he'd picked up on a trip to the Black Forest years ago, one of the few things he owned that wasn't about status. It was just beautiful. She crept forward and took it, her tiny fingers tracing the delicate wings. She didn't say thank you. She just looked at him with those unnervingly familiar gray eyes. Sarah watched them, her arms crossed, a guardian at the gate. "Go play on the swings, honey," she said to Lily. Lily ran off, clutching the bird. Alistair stood up, feeling the immense gulf between himself and this woman he once knew better than himself. "My parents are dead," he said quietly. "My father 5 years ago, my mother last year. I can't ask them why they did what they did." Sarah's expression softened for a fraction of a second. "I'm sorry, Alistair." "Don't be," he said. "They built my prison, but I was the one who locked the door." He walked over to the swings where Lily was trying to get herself going, her small legs pumping futilely. Without a word, he stood behind her and gave a gentle push. She squealed in delight. He pushed again, a little higher this time. A rhythm developed between them. The push, the forward arc, the breathless return. For a few minutes he wasn't a CEO or a billionaire. He was just a man pushing his daughter on a swing, the rusty chain groaning a simple, repetitive song. "Higher, Starman!" Lily cried out, her voice full of laughter. The name, so full of joy and innocence, struck him with more force than any business deal ever had. This small, perfect creature believed he was something magical. He felt a warmth spread through his chest, a feeling so alien he almost didn't recognize it. It was hope. "Mommy said you went to the stars," Lily said, her voice carrying on the wind as she flew back towards him. "Are you back now?" His throat tightened. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, pushing her again, higher and higher, as if he could launch her all the way to the sky he had supposedly come from. In that moment, watching her fly, a fragile alliance was forged. He knew he would do anything to protect her, to keep that laughter in the air. Later that week, he had his lawyers set up an irrevocable trust in Lily's name, seeding it with $100 million. But he knew Sarah was right. It wasn't enough. Money was easy. Presence was hard. He started carving out time, canceling meetings, delegating tasks. He was learning a new language, the language of bedtime stories and scraped knees. He was beginning to build a bridge across the lost decade. But he was unaware of the viper in his own nest, watching his transformation, not with joy, but with cold, calculating fury. His new world was a threat to hers, and she was about to strike. Isabella Thorne watched Alistair's metamorphosis with growing alarm. The man she had agreed to marry, the cold, ambitious emperor of industry, was disappearing. He was being replaced by a distracted, sentimental stranger. The Apex merger, the deal that would cement their status as the ultimate power couple, was being neglected. He was late for strategy sessions. He was delegating calls to his subordinates. All for a woman and a child who had crawled out of the woodwork. She had seen the DNA report on his desk. She knew the girl was his, and in that moment she knew Lily wasn't just a distraction, she was a threat. A direct biological threat to the empire she intended to rule by Alistair's side. A new heir changed everything. It diluted her power, her claim, her future. This sentimental reunion had to be destroyed before it could take root. Her first move was surgical. An anonymous encrypted email sent from a public library computer to Harvey Finch, the most ruthless gossip columnist in the city. The email contained just enough information to be lethal. Alistair Vance's name, Sarah Jenkins's name, a grainy photo of them in the park, and the explosive suggestion of a secret love child. It was carefully worded to paint Sarah as a calculating gold digger who had conveniently reappeared just as Alistair was about to close the biggest deal of his life. The story broke 2 days later. It was the lead item on every major news site, a digital wildfire. Vance's billion-dollar baby mama, the secret past of the city's most private CEO. Alistair was in a meeting with the Apex legal team when his phone began to vibrate incessantly. He ignored it until his head of PR burst into the conference room, his face pale. He held up a tablet displaying the headline. The room fell silent. Alistair felt a cold fury rise within him. This wasn't a random leak. This was a targeted attack. He found Isabella in their shared penthouse, pacing in front of the window wall, a perfect performance of outrage on her face. "I cannot believe this," she exclaimed, rushing to him. "It's disgusting. How could anyone print such filth? They're turning your personal tragedy into a circus. This poor woman, this child, hounded by the press. We have to do something." He looked at her, searching her face. Her concern seemed genuine, her anger righteous. He felt a surge of gratitude for her strength, her partnership. She was his rock in this storm. "I'm going to get them," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'm moving them somewhere safe. And I'm going to find out who did this." "Of course, darling," Isabella said, wrapping her arms around him. "We'll fight this together. I'll have my lawyers draft a statement. We'll sue them for everything they have." As he held her, he didn't feel the chill of her calculation. He didn't see the flicker of triumph in her eyes. He only saw his ally, his partner, the woman who stood beside him. He had no idea that the viper he was hunting was coiled in his own arms, its venom already coursing through the veins of his life. The attack was designed not just to hurt Sarah, but to test him, to see if the pressure would drive him back into his fortress of solitude, away from the daughter who was undoing him. Isabella watched him leave to go to Sarah, confident that the first crack in his new foundation had appeared. The chaos had just begun. The media storm was a hurricane. Paparazzi, like vultures, descended on Sarah's apartment building. They swarmed her on her way to work. They shouted questions at Lily on her way to school. Long-lensed cameras were permanently aimed at their windows. Lily was terrified, waking up from nightmares of flashing lights. Sarah, fiercely protective, felt the walls of her small, hard-won life closing in. Alistair acted decisively. He moved them in the dead of night to a secure, unlisted penthouse in a residential tower he owned on the other side of the city. It was a gilded cage, 3 times the size of their old apartment, with bulletproof windows and a private elevator. It was safe, but it was sterile. It was his world, not theirs. Sarah stood in the center of the vast living room, surrounded by minimalist furniture and abstract art, looking lost. "This isn't a home, Alistair. It's a fortress." "It's temporary," he assured her, "until I can guarantee your safety." But the attacks were only escalating. The leak had been the opening salvo. Now the real assault began. Isabella, seeing that the media hadn't been enough to sever the bond, moved to her next phase. She used a high-priced, unscrupulous lawyer, a man who owed her family a favor, to file an anonymous complaint with the city's Child Protective Services. The complaint was a masterpiece of malicious fiction. It painted Sarah as an unstable, negligent mother. It cited her previous poverty, her transient living situations, and it twisted Leo's involvement into something sinister, alleging that Sarah allowed her daughter to associate with a homeless delinquent, placing her in constant danger. It even implied that Lily's fall in the park, the one that had led Leo to call Alistair, was a result of Sarah's inattention. The knock on the door of the penthouse came 2 days later. A stern-faced woman and a weary-looking man from CPS. They had a court order to investigate a claim of child endangerment. Alistair, who had been there reading Lily a bedtime story, felt a rage so pure and cold it almost choked him. This was no longer about media spin or public perception. This was a direct threat to his daughter, an attempt to use the power of the state to tear his nascent family apart. Sarah was terrified, but she stood her ground, answering their questions with a quiet dignity that infuriated Alistair on her behalf. They wanted to interview Lily. Alone. "Absolutely not," Alistair said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. He got his head of legal on the phone immediately. A team of the city's best family law attorneys was assembled within the hour. The battle had shifted from the tabloids to the courts. The pressure was immense. The board of Vance Industries was in a panic. The Apex merger was looking shaky. The investors were getting nervous about the instability surrounding their CEO. Whispers started in the financial papers. Was Alistair Vance losing his grip? Isabella was his constant shadow, the perfect image of the supportive fiancé. She sat in on legal briefings. She offered strategic advice. She lamented the cruelty of the anonymous accuser. "Whoever is doing this wants to destroy you, Alistair," she said one evening, pouring him a brandy. "They're not just attacking Sarah. They're attacking the merger. They're attacking our future. You have to see that this is a coordinated assault on your empire, and these people are the weak point they're exploiting." She was framing it as a business problem, a hostile takeover using personal weapons. She was trying to force him back into the mindset of the isolated emperor, to see his daughter and her mother as liabilities to be managed, or even cut loose. But she had miscalculated. The attack wasn't making him retreat, it was forging him into something new. Every legal challenge, every slanderous accusation only solidified his resolve. He wasn't just defending a business interest. He was defending his child. The threats were escalating, but so was his transformation from a cold-blooded CEO into a ferocious, protective father. He would burn down his own empire to keep his daughter safe, a realization that was slowly dawning on him, and one that Isabella, in her arrogance, could not yet see. The CPS case was too polished, too precise. The legal filings were aggressive, the language expertly crafted to cause maximum damage. Alistair's investigator, Marcus, a man who had spent his life navigating the city's underbelly, felt it in his gut. This wasn't the work of some disgruntled neighbor or a random crank. This was professional. This was personal. "Amateurs leave messes," Marcus told Alistair, in a hushed meeting in a soundproofed room. "This is clean. Too clean. The anonymous tips, the CPS complaint, they're firewalled 6 ways from Sunday, but someone is paying for top-tier legal muscle to push this thing. That costs money. A lot of it." Alistair, now running on coffee and a cold, simmering rage, gave Marcus a blank check. "Find them," he ordered. "I don't care what it takes. Find the source." While Marcus dug into the dark web of shell corporations and burner phones, Alistair found himself watching Isabella with a new unsettling awareness. He started noticing things, tiny cracks in her perfect facade. A conversation she relayed from his lawyer where she mentioned a detail from a sealed document she shouldn't have seen. A casual reference to Leo as the street kid from the complaint, when the details of the CPS filing were supposed to be confidential. Each instance was small, easily explained away, but they began to accumulate like grains of sand, forming a weight of suspicion in his mind. The breaking point came during a strategy meeting with his legal team. They were discussing a potential witness the anonymous petitioner's lawyers wanted to call, a disgruntled former landlord of Sarah's from years ago. Later that evening, Isabella was trying to soothe him. "Darling, you look exhausted. This whole thing with the landlord, it's just another disgusting tactic. Don't let it get to you." Alistair froze. He hadn't told her about the landlord. The legal team had decided to keep that specific detail under wraps while they investigated the man's credibility. Only 4 people in the world were supposed to know about it, the 3 lawyers on his team and him. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time in weeks. He saw the carefully maintained mask of concern, but underneath it he detected a flicker of something else, a nervous energy. He said nothing, simply nodding and retreating to his study. He immediately called Marcus. "Focus on Isabella," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Check her financials, her communications, everything." Marcus, ever the professional, didn't ask questions. "On it," he said. The answer came less than 12 hours later. It arrived not as a file, but with Marcus himself, who insisted on delivering the news in person. He laid a single tablet on Alistair's desk. On the screen was a diagram of financial transactions, a spiderweb of deceit. It started with a private slush fund, an account Isabella maintained for personal shopping and travel. From there, money flowed into a holding company registered in the Cayman Islands. From that company, it was funneled to 2 places: a high-end public relations firm known for its Black Ops media campaigns and the expense account of the unscrupulous lawyer spearheading the CPS case. It was all there. Bank records, encrypted emails Marcus's team had cracked, phone logs from a burner phone she kept hidden in a safe deposit box, the gossip column leak, the CPS complaint, the relentless, vicious campaign to destroy Sarah and drive a wedge between Alistair and his daughter. It had all been orchestrated by the woman wearing his engagement ring. Alistair stared at the screen, the world narrowing to the glowing, damning evidence. The sense of betrayal was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his chest that stole the air from his lungs. It wasn't a business rival. It wasn't a stranger. The viper had been sleeping in his bed, whispering support in his ear while methodically trying to poison everything he had just begun to care about. The grief he had felt for Sarah's supposed death was a dull ache compared to this sharp, searing agony. His sorrow curdled into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous, righteous fury. The isolated emperor had been reawakened, but this time his kingdom was not one of steel and glass. It was a little girl with his eyes, and he was about to go to war. The final signing of the Apex merger was scheduled for 3 p.m. on Friday. It was the culmination of 2 years of ruthless negotiation, the deal that would redefine his legacy and make Vance Industries the undisputed global leader. The boardroom was electric with anticipation. Alistair sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, flanked by his lawyers and executives. Across from him sat the Apex CEO and his team. The multi-billion-dollar contracts, hundreds of pages thick, were laid out before them, awaiting a final signature. Isabella, not knowing she was exposed, had planned her endgame with chilling precision. She believed Alistair was still the man she had agreed to marry, the man for whom the deal was everything. She had arranged for the CPS agents, armed with a new, trumped-up emergency order, to arrive at the penthouse at exactly 3:15 p.m. Her logic was brutally simple. Alistair would receive the frantic call from Sarah in the middle of the most important moment of his professional life. He would be faced with an impossible choice: stay and sign, securing their empire and delegating the family issue to his lawyers, thus proving he was still the cold calculator she needed him to be. Or leave, throwing the deal and his company into chaos, proving to the board and the world that he was an emotionally compromised and unreliable leader. Either way, she believed she would win. She would either get her empire or she would get rid of the man who no longer fit her plans. Alistair saw the entire chessboard. He knew her move before she made it. He sat in the boardroom projecting an aura of calm focus while his mind raced. He had already set his own pieces in motion. Marcus was with a judge, presenting the evidence of Isabella's conspiracy to have the CPS order nullified on grounds of malicious prosecution. But the timing would be tight. At 3:14 p.m., just as the Apex CEO picked up his pen, Alistair's personal phone, lying face down on the table, began to vibrate. He knew who it was. He let it buzz once, twice. The entire room watched him. This was the moment. The moral gauntlet. He calmly flipped the phone over. The screen read, "Sarah." He answered, putting it on speaker for the entire room to hear. "Alistair!" Sarah's voice was tight with panic. "They're here. They have a paper. They say they're taking her. Lily is crying. I don't know what to do." In the background, he could hear his daughter's terrified sobs, a sound that cut through the boardroom's silent tension like a shard of glass. Isabella, who had insisted on being present for the historic moment, watched him from the corner of the room, her expression a perfect mask of shock and concern, but he could see the glint of victory in her eyes. She thought she had him trapped. Alistair looked at the Apex CEO, who had frozen, pen hovering over the signature line. He looked at his board members, their faces a mixture of confusion and horror. He looked at the contract, the symbol of his entire life's ambition. Then he stood up. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "something has come up. The deal is off." A collective gasp went through the room. His own CFO looked like he was about to have a heart attack. "Alistair, what are you doing?" his lead lawyer hissed. "This is corporate suicide." Alistair ignored them all. He locked eyes with Isabella across the room, a cold, knowing look that made the color drain from her face. She finally understood. He knew. He turned and walked out of the boardroom without a backward glance, leaving behind a $50 billion crater and a room full of stunned executives. He was no longer choosing between his empire and his family. He was choosing his family, and in doing so, he was redefining what his empire truly was. He raced for the elevator, the sound of his daughter's crying the only thing in the world that mattered. The emperor had just abdicated his throne to save the princess. The chaos he left in his wake was apocalyptic for Vance Industries, but Alistair didn't feel a shred of regret. He was a man possessed by a singular purpose. By the time he reached the penthouse, his lawyers, armed with the emergency injunction from the judge Marcus had cornered, were already there. They presented the papers to the stunned CPS agents. The order was null and void, and the case was being thrown out with a pending investigation into the fraudulent claims that had initiated it. The agents left. Sarah collapsed into his arms, shaking with relief. Lily, her face tear-streaked, ran and clung to his leg, hiding from a world that had tried to snatch her away. He knelt and pulled her into a hug, burying his face in her dark curls, breathing in the simple scent of her shampoo. In that moment, he felt a sense of victory more profound than any corporate conquest. He had protected his own. He stayed with them until Lily was asleep, her small hand clutching his. He assured Sarah that it was over, that they were safe now. Then he went home to face the Viper. He found Isabella in the vast, silent living room of his penthouse, a glass of champagne in her hand, the bottle chilling in a silver bucket beside her. She had been waiting to celebrate her victory. When she saw his face, the triumphant smile froze on her lips. "The deal," she stammered. "You walked away. You threw everything away for them." "Not everything," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. He walked to the bar, not to pour a drink, but to retrieve the tablet Marcus had given him. He placed it on the marble coffee table between them and tapped the screen. The web of her financial deceit, her emails, her payments to the lawyers and the media firm, all glowed in the dim light. She stared at it, her composure finally shattering. The mask fell away, revealing the raw, desperate ambition beneath. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "My family, we were ruined. My father's investments collapsed. We had nothing left but the name. You were my only way out. You and your empire." There it was, the true motive. It wasn't about love or partnership. It was a hostile takeover of his life. Lily hadn't been a rival for his affection. She was a threat to Isabella's financial salvation, an unexpected heir who would complicate the inheritance she saw as rightfully hers. "So you tried to destroy a 7-year-old girl," Alistair said, the disgust thick in his voice. "You terrorized her and her mother. You used my daughter as a pawn in your pathetic, greedy game." "I did what I had to do," she shrieked, her voice rising, "to protect our future." "There is no our future," he said, his voice like ice. He picked up his phone and pressed a single button on his speed dial. "Security. I have a trespasser in my apartment who needs to be removed." He walked over to the window and pulled the diamond engagement ring from his pocket, the one she had left on the nightstand that morning. He didn't look at her as he let it drop from his fingers. It fell 48 stories, a tiny glittering star disappearing into the darkness. He heard the elevator doors open, the quiet, firm voices of his security team. He heard Isabella's protests, then a sob of defeat. He didn't turn around until he heard the doors close, sealing her out of his life forever. The confrontation was over. The betrayer had been exiled. He stood alone in his silent, empty penthouse, the kingdom he had built now feeling like a tomb. But he wasn't the isolated emperor anymore. He was just a father. And for the first time in a decade, he knew exactly where he belonged. 6 months later, the world of Alistair Vance was unrecognizable. The financial news channels had feasted on his story for weeks. Vance implosion. CEO steps down after scuttling Apex merger. They called it the most spectacular, inexplicable fall from grace in modern corporate history. Vance Industries' stock had plummeted before stabilizing under a new board-appointed CEO. Alistair had retained his controlling interest, but had relinquished all operational control, retreating from public life entirely. To the world he was a cautionary tale, a titan who had lost his mind. But inside a sun-drenched, sprawling house with a big green lawn, a home, not a penthouse, a very different story was unfolding. The living room was not filled with abstract art and designer furniture, but with colorful drawings taped to the walls and a fortress of pillows and blankets in the middle of the floor. Alistair, dressed in a simple T-shirt and jeans, was on his hands and knees, making dragon noises as he crawled into the fortress. Lily's delighted shrieks of laughter echoed through the house. The hollow look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a light he never knew was missing. He was no longer haunted by the ghost of a lost love. He was grounded by the vibrant presence of his daughter. Sarah came in from the kitchen carrying a tray with a pitcher of lemonade and 3 glasses. She smiled, a genuine, easy smile that reached her eyes. The lines of worry on her face had softened. They were not trying to reclaim the past, but were carefully, patiently building something new, a family forged in crisis and truth. "The monster is demanding a tribute of cookies," she announced. "The dragon will protect the princess from the cookie monster," Alistair roared playfully, pulling Lily into a hug. A car pulled into the driveway. A few minutes later, the front door opened and Leo walked in, dropping a backpack by the door. He looked different, too, healthy, confident, wearing a new school uniform. Alistair had kept his promise. He had established a multi-million-dollar foundation for the city's homeless and at-risk youth, and Leo was its first and most honored success story. He had a full scholarship to the best private school in the state and lived in a safe, supportive group home funded by the foundation. But he spent most weekends here, an unofficial but essential part of their family. He was the boy who had made the call that changed everything. "Hey," Leo said, grinning. "Did I miss the dragon attack?" "You're just in time to help defend the castle," Alistair said, standing up and ruffling the boy's hair. Later that afternoon, the 3 of them, Alistair, Sarah, and Lily, sat on a blanket in the backyard. Lily was nestled between them, showing Alistair the wooden bird he had given her on that first day in the park, which she now carried everywhere. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, a simple gesture of trust and peace that felt more valuable than any stock certificate. Alistair looked at his new kingdom. It wasn't a realm of glass and steel, but of grass and sunlight. Its value couldn't be measured in dollars, but in laughter and lemonade, and the feeling of his daughter's head resting against his chest. He had lost an empire he never truly wanted and gained a world he couldn't live without. The victory was total, his redemption complete. The Starman had finally come home.